Well, welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about getting your short fiction and poetry in magazines and anthologies. Um, we are the HWA Ontario chapter, and I'm David 13, who's the event coordinator for the chapter. We're really lucky with the HWA Ontario chapter to have lots of very talented members who are doing some amazing things these days. And what we're wanting to do with these panels is have our members share their experience with other members. And today we're in for a real treat. The three authors we have with us today are just really knocking it out of the park in terms of getting their fiction out there in the past year or two. And I've been really looking forward to this. So I'd like to welcome our guests here. I'm sorry, I just want to check out our Twitch to see what order everybody's in. All right. So I'm going to introduce people as they're appearing on the Twitch screen. Sorry, juggling notes and screens. And so with us today, we have Jessica Peters, who is a writer of horror and dark fiction with a soft spot for history, myth, and folklore. Her work can be found in Lamplight Magazine, The Anti-Humanist, and Dreams of Shadows, as well as the anthologies Deadly Waters, Deadly Women of the Sea, and Howls from the Dark Ages, along with many others. Next, we have Jiang. She is a Chinese-Canadian writer, a Nebula finalist for short story. Her work can be found in Fantasy and Science Fiction magazine, The Dark, Uncanny, The Masters Review, and many others. Additionally, she just released a collection of short fiction called Small Tales from Between Worlds, and she has a novel coming out in 2 days titled Ling Hun. And we have Suzan Palumbo, who is a Trinidadian-Canadian speculative fiction writer, a two-time Nebula finalist for short fiction, and the co-founder of the Ignite Awards. Her work can be found in The Dark, Lightspeed, Fantasy Magazine, Deadlands, and Pseudopod, just to name a few. She has a story collection coming out in the fall from Neon Hamlet Press called The Skin Thief Stories, and a novella coming out next year called The Countess, or sorry, just Countess. So welcome all. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So I think there's like hundreds of blogs and podcasts out there with the basics of submitting short fiction. So I don't want this panel to just be repeating those facts. I really wanted to explore your experiences. I'll try to tackle this in a way that we cover the various steps in the process, but we may skip or skim over some of them, or some of the more mechanical aspects that can be easily found elsewhere. My first question is that, perhaps there was a time when writing short stories and submitting them out there was the logical first step for a writer when they're building up their career. I don't think that's the case anymore. There's a lot of different routes to go through. Writers can go anywhere, and, doing the short story markets, maybe the first thing they do may be somewhere down the line, may never happen. I know myself, I only started submitting short stories after about 5 years of writing novels. So what I'm really curious from each of you is, what was your reasons for writing and submitting short stories? What motivated you? What did you hope to get out of it? And has your reasons changed or evolved over time? Jessica, would you like to begin?
Sure, yeah. So like you, David, I started writing novels. I considered myself only a novel writer for like over a decade, I'd say. I've been poking at stuff and querying agents and still working on the publication side of that. But it is where I came with a lot of my craft and my critiquing, and all of that came from novels first for me. It was only about, I guess it was about 2 years ago, early 2021, where I was like, you know what, I do have scattered short stories that I've written. I'm going to try to put these together, edit them, and see what's out there, because I wasn't really even familiar with the short story landscape, because I would have called myself a novel writer and a novel reader. Even novellas felt a bit short at the time for me, because I was so used to novels only. But then when I did move into short stories, it took a while to hit. And then it suddenly hit. And it was like, now I'm really, I was making spreadsheets of the markets that people mentioned in their bios, even that, to figure out what were the big markets. And then I just started submitting, and I got hooked on it. And it's really anthology calls with themes that really were spontaneously inciting new ideas and new inspiration to keep doing the short markets.
Fantastic.
So I kind of approached it like what you said, that people don't really approach it as anymore, where I wanted to start with short stories to kind of like develop my craft and like gain more of a readership by like getting my name out first before I go for long form, because I have heard like previously, before knowing all like the small presses and indie presses, how long traditional publishing takes, and like, the whole process of finding an agent and things like that. So I was like, oh, okay, but like short stories takes very, I would say, like, depending on the person, less time to write, easier to send out, but definitely not easier to get published with how many submissions magazines get every month, especially the big SFFH ones. But my thought process was, if I just write very fast and a lot of them and scattershot them everywhere, surely some of them might land. Yeah, so that was my intention with short stories.
Great. Suzanne.
So I'm the weird person who is like, I'm an artist and I want to create things. So I've always, since I'm no longer a teenager. Since I was a teenager, I really loved short stories and short story collections, and my degree was English Lit, and I took a lot of short story classes. So I've always loved short stories. That's my natural length. I'm trying to write a novel right now, and I'm dying because novels are a completely different land, and with different pacing. So that's how I came to short stories. I started submitting though, because I had a different career before as a teacher. I started submitting in 2015. And I kind of got into it because I enjoyed reading short stories online. I liked what I read, and I thought, wow, I want to do that too. I want to write a story that somebody else reads and goes, wow, I connect with that, or I really feel that what they're trying to convey. That was it for me. That is still it for me. Even though I have this career and I'm trying to build all these other things, at the heart of it is I want to connect with other people about how I feel, and short stories seem to be the best way for me to do that, for me personally. So I don't know if I never really approached it as career building, more so much as trying to connect, and I guess connection is career building. So I started in 2015, and I had a really rough time. Well, my first story was a pro sale, which shocked me and probably wasn't the best thing, because it did not prepare me for the 2.5 years of constant rejection afterwards. And then after that sort of period, I seem to have found, I don't necessarily want to say my stride, but I seem to have figured out what works for me, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. So I do have a couple of follow-up questions, and this touches on something that I said. you mentioned like you were hoping to like it would develop you as a writer. Did it work that way? Has anybody else found that by writing short stories you've improved with, I don't know, with the way you tell stories?
Yeah, I'd say so. So my, I don't know if you're asking me or anyone.
Anybody.
Okay, sorry.
So,
Yes, I will say yes, because I read a billion writer's craft books and all of that beforehand, but then when you're writing short stories, you actually get to put into action more things than if you're focusing on novels, which I was for a long time.
I think writing, because I spent so much of my time, I spent so much of my time reading published work, and I spent so much of my time reading short stories online. I think that's good. But writing really gets you into the space of, because when you read short stories online, usually they've gone through a professional editing process, right? So what you're seeing is the very polished end. Oh, I love that cat thing.
He's arrived.
Right? But that doesn't show you all the behind the scenes that's going on, all of the revision or all of the other horrible things that happen while you're trying to make a story or what you go through. So yes, writing short stories does, just in the writing itself, it does teach you things. I also read Slush for a couple magazines. And so, what you see that's published and what's behind the scenes are very different. And writing sort of gives you part of that glimpse. I think Slush reading also gives you a bit of that if you're able to do it. Not everybody is able to do it, but yeah, that also helped for me.
awesome.
I feel like I am very much the type of writer who likes to self-edit as I'm writing, and it would be very, very difficult to do with long form, as I am finding out now. But with short stories, you can really like get into like the sentence level and spend a lot of time with each sentence without getting burnt out before you reach the end, especially with like flash and micro pieces, right? Or like shorter length short stories. So I definitely think in terms of like sentence level craft, I have improved as a result of short stories.
Great. I just want to give a word out to all of people watching on Twitch. I do see we have a bit of an audience today. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and we will try to. Sorry, I was reading some of the comments here. We will try to get to them if you have any questions for our guests. Thanks. All right, so let's get into the process of this and sort of leading into like improving in our ability to tell stories. A big part of this is starting off with a good short story, and that's something that obviously all of you know how to do, but is also a topic for another panel or possibly a whole series of panels. So let's just say, I've written my very first short story and I've run it past a few writer friends I trust and they say it's good to go. The next step, I think, really would be to try to find a market for it. And there's a lot of different types of markets out there. All different types of pay rates. There's magazines, anthologies, podcasts. What should I be looking for? And what I really mean by that is, what do you look for? Also, what do you avoid? Anybody want to jump in on that?
I'll go first because I'm probably the most chaotic. So when I'm in a bit of a different position right now than I was when I first started. So I don't do all of these things now necessarily. Though I am chaotic. When I first started writing and I first started trying to get short stories published, I sent my stories to the magazines that I liked reading. And then I ended up sort of researching, and then if you belong to any sort of forum or any sort of, there are a lot of free ones. I was on Scribophile a long time ago, and there were groups that had different lists of where you could submit to, or like a lot of people use Submission Grinder, which is an aggregator site of, you know, different markets and pay and stuff like that. So I ended up searching the internet for places to submit and then reading them and sort of trying to see if I liked the work that they published, because I wanted to be in magazines that I liked. But of course, there are tons of factors when you're deciding. A lot of people say, you know, they make a list and they have spreadsheets and they say, okay, you start with pro pay first. And then after the pro pay people that suit your story, then you're going to go to the semi pro, and then you're going to go to the token rate thing. So, I mean, you could organize it that way. There are tons of ways to organize it. You can organize it by not just pay, but by reach, by prestige, or who you like best. So when I first started, I did have an issue of trying to get into magazines that everybody else thought were dream publications. And I don't think that really worked for me very well, trying to be in things that other people thought where you should be. And I was getting really frustrated because I was getting rejected all the time. So I kind of gave up on that and started just going where people loved me. So it didn't matter if they paid me a token rate or if they paid me a professional rate. I just wanted my story out. And if I got my story out, then people would be able to read it. And that would be better than not being read at all. So that's where I sort of found my sort of momentum, going to places that it didn't matter what they paid necessarily, but they liked my work. Is that a strategy? I don't know.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Anybody else want to comment on that question?
All right, I'll weigh in on strategy. I am a very structured person, maybe the opposite of Susan's. So I have a spreadsheet. I just opened it. I have 156 different markets categorized by pay level with the description, what they take. And it's like sci-fi, fantasy, horror, poetry, short stories. I'm ridiculous. I make lists upon lists upon lists. So that is where I come from it. But I started the spreadsheet especially because I didn't know the short story market at all. So I really literally started looking at people's bios and making lists of the ones people said they were proud of, and then going to look at those and seeing if they matched. But where I really started was submitting to ones that were going to have be published in a physical book. Because I was reading, other than like the very top free ones, like Uncanny, Strange Horizons, Nightmare, The Dark, which those 4 I have not cracked yet, and I love them all. Other than those ones, like it was like, oh yeah, I think I want to be in books. And then I realized after, when I've gotten a bunch of wonderful anthologies, I don't have anything. I had very few things that I could say, here's my writing, and people could see it somewhere online for free. So then I started targeting those. But also what Suzan was saying about people that target pro and then semi-pro and then token rate things. I kind of started with that, but my top rank wasn't all necessarily pro paying. It also included those ones I just liked a lot. Like things with, one of the things I like is really good art, really good covers, all of that sort of thing. Like even if they're paying 1 cent a word, if it's going to go in something that's going to look beautiful, it can go up on my top list. So yeah, structure, lists, searching, and Submission Grinder. I also use Submission Grinder.
All right, I guess I will come in with my very chaotic methods. So when I first started submitting, I wrote a lot of like realist fiction, like stuff that was very similar to what I read in undergrad. Like Suzan, I also did English Lit, so I read a lot of the classic, Virginia Woolf, things like that. So obviously, when I first started writing short stories, I really try to emulate that kind of writing. And I didn't know about Submission Grinder back then, so I went through Submittable. And it is quite questionable sometimes in that there are a lot of magazines and journals that will ask you for pay, right? And so so I didn't know that back then. And obviously I paid way too much to submit and racked up rejections from that. And then after I discovered I actually liked it like writing SFFH more, and I found a submission grinder, and I realized that you should not be paying for submissions. But yes, but like in terms of strategies, I literally would just scattershot my submissions to anyone that was open, to anything that would take even like slightly what I was writing. Because at that point, I didn't really know any of the markets, or like even when you sometimes read a lot of their fiction, you still don't quite yet know as a new writer how your writing might fit in or it might not fit in. So I would just like not self-reject and try anyways. And based on like personal rejections or form rejections, I kind of like recalibrate which markets I would target. But then when I was a newer writer, obviously I would also try to change my voice to try to fit the markets I really wanted to go to. But then I realized I wasn't enjoying writing like that as much because I wasn't as passionate, right, about the voice, and it didn't feel like me. So nowadays I kind of just write whatever I want in the voice and style that I have developed, and then see which markets look for that kind of voice and try to just avoid the ones that don't, because it's likely that I'll just never get into those markets because this is just how my writing is. Yeah.
Great. I just want to switch over here to some of the stuff that's coming up in the stream chat. We do have a few questions about, I guess, craft. Maybe we can get to those near the end. Sorry, I'm just looking through here. I do want to point out we have Hop Kiddo has said the path Jessica is describing right now is exactly the path that seems to make sense to me. Try to get into the outlets, printed books she mentioned, and then the ones you want to be reading yourself. Let's see. Okay, and we have a question from. Oops, my screen just skipped, so I missed it. A question from G Bliss PVD. What are the best sources to find out about calls for themed anthologies?
The Horror Tree newsletter is massive, and Submission Grinder itself also helps. They also have a newsletter.
Uh-oh. Are we having problems?
I think I'm having problems.
Oh, okay. I saw a few videos that look frozen too, so.
Oh, maybe everyone is.
Okay, at least we're talking. Hi, Suzanne. Are you okay? Like,
I mean, generally or on this thing.
Okay, everybody seems to be okay. Okay, just for a second,
yeah,
everything looked frozen.
I'm fine now.
I thought my internet went down.
Yeah, Jessica froze for me.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, Jessica froze for me as well.
Sorry, I think you were talking about the Horror Tree and Submission Grinder. I think I agree. Like, I think Horror Tree is really good for theme submissions. Submission trees, Submission Grinder is a bit hard to sort through. It's good to see what's open, but not necessarily see what's coming
But they
up.
also have a newsletter. That's what I was saying when I froze, I think.
Right. Thanks, Jessica. And I actually see a question from Suze J11. What is your strategy around simultaneous submissions? And I actually did have a question about that myself. I know it's a bit technical, but I am kind of curious about this because it's always something I wonder, because I think I've often heard it said that, pick the simultaneous submissions first because you can just like send it out to a bunch of places at once. But in my experience, I've always found it that they're often the longest places to respond, and it sort of ties you up from sending it to a place that doesn't accept simultaneous submissions. Does anybody have any thoughts on that or advice or?
Okay, so I'm not organized enough to handle simultaneous submissions. I used to in 2015, maybe I had a spreadsheet that I kept things on. I don't do spreadsheets anymore. So I actually can't handle them because I don't want to make a mistake and send something and then I don't know where it is. So I think maybe that's a question for people who submit more because I don't even have that many like high quantity numbers in terms of actually submitting. I will say though that from what I've heard, it's when I used to slush read, people sometimes we used to respond within 2 weeks. And for me, if the market is going to respond quickly, then I wouldn't necessarily do a simultaneous submission. But if they're taking a long time, just generally, like if you look at the submission grinder, you look them up and you see that their response time is really long and they allow simultaneous submissions, then I would in that case if I was organized and was going to write it down.
Thanks, Suzanne.
I will weigh in on these. So, no sim sub markets. I have two immediate thoughts. I find no sim sub markets, if they're not fast, they are unfriendly to authors. In almost any other art field or non-art field, you're not going to say, I might want to buy the table you've made. I'm going to hold it for 3 months and I might never pay you for it. I might just return it. They're author unfriendly practices, and I am a obsessive rule follower, and I'm scared of rule breaking. So I do simultaneously submit widely to places that allow it, and the places that don't allow it, I sometimes don't even bother submitting there. And some of them are the big ones too. I mean, I don't submit to Apex that often because they're a bit quicker than some, but there's a few no sim sub markets that are slow and no sim sub. And I basically just avoid them because I'm scared to break the rules and I find it author unfriendly, and I could submit to other places that have pretty similar reach, pay, appeal to me. So that's right. Unless I do it by mistake. I'm like, oops, I submitted this one twice. And it's like, uh-oh.
Yeah, that's surprisingly easy to do.
So a little different answer from my fellow panelists. I admittedly will sim sub to non-sim sub markets. I will not say which ones, I will not say when, and not always, only sometimes. And I'm pretty sure everyone has figured that out by now by how widely and how often I submit. But I will say I will stagger them strategically so that sometimes responses will not influence each other. Like if I accidentally get 2 acceptances at one non-sim sub market and a sim sub market or something like that, or I will sim sub them to vastly different aesthetic markets so that if one does accept it, it's very clearly their style. And it will very clearly the other market won't accept it. But sometimes you don't quite know which one of those markets it will fit at, because it could fit at both, but it could also not fit at both, but it would only fit at one but not the other, if that makes sense. So that is, one of my strategies to get work out as fast as possible, well, sometimes breaking the rules, but without actually breaking the rules, if that makes sense.
I admire the rule breaking. I'm just a big
Admire
chicken.
everybody with organizing and like, because you really have to be organized, you know, like to do that. You have to have like you can't just be all over the place, and I'm all over the place, so like can't do that. So I'm floored. Well done.
Okay. All right, let's move along in the process here. And I admit that this next question might be hard to answer. I don't know how I would answer it if I was asked this question, but I do think it's sort of necessary to bring up this stage of the process. So at least it's actually stated as a step. And so I have a short story, and I found the market I wanted to submit it to. The website of the publication will give me guidelines about formatting and other details like word limits and what type of stories they're looking for. I think, pro tip, always read and follow the guidelines. But beyond the guidelines, is there anything that can be done to improve your chances of an acceptance?
At a specific market, you're thinking?
I don't know. Like we're at the stage of I'm about to submit it. What do I don't know about? Is I guess what I'm asking. Well, what tricks, and I heard there might be some chaos magic involved that we can use to improve our chances.
So what you do is you hex everybody. No. You put spells on everyone. Honestly, I was thinking about this and I was like, okay, well, how do you improve your chances of getting into a magazine? It's kind of hard because when you're reading what's published in the specific magazine, it shows you what they've already published. So you get an idea of kind of what they like, but you don't want to send them always. They don't necessarily want you to submit exactly what they've published before, because they don't want to publish sometimes all of the same, like the same plot or the same thing, unless it's a magazine with a certain voice. And I find, let's take The Dark, for example, because people laugh about The Dark all the time. The Dark is great for simultaneous submissions because they will kick you out in like 5 minutes, right? And I kind of love watching people get mad about them. Because I had that experience with them myself. I once had okay, I'm gonna really tell the truth. I once got a critique from Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I believe that's her name. And she was one of the co-editors at The Dark at the time, and she said, this is quite good, this story. You should send it to Sean and say I recommended it. And he kicked me out in 10 minutes. So I mean, how do you improve your chances in a situation like that? I find what it is for a specific magazine is not so much looking at the plot and stuff, but trying to find what sort of aesthetic or voice that they have, and maybe trying to aim your submissions towards magazines that have an aesthetic or a voice that is similar to yours. And I think I sort of fit with The Dark that way. That's why I finally ended up in there. But I mean, there was a lot of 5-minute, 15-minute, half an hour rejections that I got from them.
Yeah, I think I got a rejection once after 3 days. I was quite proud of it.
That's like practically an acceptance.
Yeah, I mean that's a thing, and I mean people, they do look at every submission. I don't know if they read them to the end, but what they're looking at is for the tone or the voice or whatever, if it fits. That's what I think they must be doing. So that's why I said, I went for tone or atmosphere.
I was going to kind of answer a backwards thing to this. So I have targeted things to publications before. I've done like an assessment of the dark and made like a list of what they like and then been booted in like 4 minutes. Like, okay, no, I guess that wasn't it. But then those same pieces, which are perfect for this magazine or this anthology, end up in like a different pro-paying thing. And I think my secret in that is just having a decent product that could fit in multiple places and submitting, hammering it out and seeing who wants it, which is kind of the opposite of the targeting. Because when I've tried targeting, I have actually gotten into some that I wrote a story for. But a lot of the times it's I wrote a story for one market and it gets hit in a different market instead. So surprising me.
I would say I'm similar to Jessica, where basically everything I wrote targeted at a specific market does not make it into that market. It makes it somewhere else. But I will say, like, from the side of like someone who read Slush and like edited for magazines, that like your first sentence along with your first 2 paragraphs is the most important thing you will ever write in your life, because if you don't catch the Slush readers who are burnt out and very tired and like right from the get-go, like maybe you think it's unfair that they're not reading your whole story, but like if you think about how many things they are reading on a daily basis, it's just not sustainable to read your whole story. And usually when they've read that many stories, right from the first sentence even, they can tell whether or not it is for a magazine, like the tone they're looking for, the kind of even premise or concept they're looking for. Like, because I feel like for most writers, their voice and their style shines out right in the first paragraph. And if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit, you know, like no matter how good your idea is, if they don't like, well, not if they don't like your writing, but if your writing doesn't suit them, then it's a no-go. That, and do not put a laundry list of everything you've ever done in your life in your cover letters.
I just want
That
to
actually,
add to the Slush reader. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to add to the Slush reader thing. When I was a Slush reader, I read over 3,000. I was in charge of over 3,000 stories during the time that I did the Slush reading. I could not read every single story to the end. It would take up all my writing time and my life. So, like, you have to knock it out of the park. Sorry, I'll be quiet. I'm too excited.
no, talk whatever you like. I just wanted to say, because I brought up cover letters, and we actually have a question from TikTok. What advice do you have for cover letters for short story submissions?
I have a template. It's very simple. It says, "Dear," I usually say, "To the market team, I'm pleased to submit my short story. Title, it is number, words, and length." And then I either say my bio is as follows with my bio, or I just say thank you for your time. Simple. I don't even always put information about myself unless they ask for it.
Anyone else? Or I think short and sweet is generally the rule for it.
I really, I don't know if every Slush reader does this, but in my experience of Slush reading, I mean, they really just want to see how long the story is and, you know, the title and what if they take all kinds of, if they take, like, you know, all of spec, like horror, sci-fi, and fantasy, they may want to be like, well, this is a horror story, so they're ready in a horror mindset. I don't usually write very much. I mean, since the Nebula thing, I kind of mentioned the Nebula thing, but before that, I didn't really write anything else. I was very much like Jessica.
So I think there are some markets who might look for specific information after they read a certain story, especially if it touches on like sensitive topics or like own voices things. They might want to check the writer's bio to see if it is someone from that community, or like writing from like their own experience or someone outside of it tackling it, and it gives like the reader a very different perspective on how to read the story and how to receive it. So I usually do add a bio just in case, and then like whether I sign subbed or not. And then the whole, story information and like thank you for your time, things like that.
Great. Okay, so let's move along. So I set my story off and I get back a rejection and more rejections and more rejections. I think it's fair to say that most people will experience a lot of rejections while submitting their stories. I don't think I always compare it to like you get a rejection in your email box and it's a bit like getting a punch in the gut, except like just through constant repetition, it gets a bit more numb to the pain. So my question is, what tips do you have for dealing with rejection?
I always assume I'm getting rejected in everything, not just writing, everywhere. Like, I'm rejected at all. Expectations are really low about I mean, my expectations for myself, I try, and as I said, every story I put out, I send out, I've put my heart into it. But I don't expect anyone to accept me at all. And so I find that sort of low expectation kind of helps mitigate it. I mean, I hear people being like, get a thick skin, get a thick skin. And I'm like, yes, this is important. You can't spend a week crying after every rejection, because that's not really going to help you submit things or get things out. I do think it's okay to acknowledge that you feel sad though. Because you are a person and you are a writer and you are trying to write about feelings. And it's such a strange dichotomy for me where everyone's like, you have a thick skin, but also write emotional stories. And it's like, okay, how do I turn this off? So I find that difficult to do myself. I do feel sad, but then I send it out again. I don't always force myself to send it out the same day if I don't feel good about it, but I send it out again. I don't give up.
Yeah, I guess also the managing expectations. I have a kind of joking motto. I even have a plant pot that says it, never hope, which I mean is a little further beyond, but it's about managing expectations and never expecting acceptance. I mean, there's always ones that'll hit me harder because I'm like, this is the perfect piece for this perfect market. They'll definitely accept it. Then it comes back as a rejection, and it's take some time with that one and expect rejections. That's just, yeah.
So maybe my approach might sound a little macho, just, oh, I can't English. You get what I'm talking about. People who like pain. Like there was at one point where I was averaging about I think 15 to 20 rejections a week, and sometimes it might be 5 stacked in one day. And then so I just kind of like saw them as my morning coffee, as some people might say. I'll wake up and I'll be like, oh yes, a rejection, time to start my day. And I feel like just like submitting that much and getting that many rejections, it just kind of becomes a routine where you just like, you're constantly getting your work out there. Someone is seeing your work, whether it's one sentence, one paragraph, or the whole story. And it just kind of like gets me to keep going and keep submitting and keep writing. I don't know. It's a different thing than what most people think, I would say.
Some people gamify, right? Like they'd be like, oh, if I get to 50 rejections, I'm going to buy myself a cake, or I'm going to buy myself an outfit, or some people do that. I don't do that, but that is a thing that people do. Celebrate the rejection.
I'm in a rejection contest with a bunch of people, and we log how many we get each month.
Yeah, I know some people, they do like 100 rejections a year and that be the goal because it's something you can control more than like acceptances. I tried to go for that at first, but then I'm like a very compulsive, impulsive, and obsessive person where when I start doing one thing, I will obsessively do that one thing. And for me, when I started submitting short stories, that was very much that one thing I was obsessively doing.
Yeah, I usually set my personal goals around submissions over rejections, because even rejections are still in someone else's hands. You're more likely to get them than the acceptance, but it's still somebody else has to start it. But then you can get obsessed. Relatable.
Okay, so after many attempts, instead of a rejection, my story gets an acceptance and it's going to be published. So there's three things about this I want to go through. And the first is with contracts. So they're going to send you a contract. Personally, I've found the contracts I've received to be really straightforward. But have any of you ran into problems or just anything interesting with a contract that you'd like to point out? Or have you ever needed to get a lawyer involved? Anything? Or is it just, yeah, most places are going to give you a nice clear-cut contract and you sign it and end of story?
I think when you're reading contracts, some things sometimes vary. For example, I mean, I haven't really had anybody try to pull a fast one on me, but you have to there are sometimes variations. Sometimes you have to make sure exactly what rights they're buying for the money that they are giving you in return for that. Sometimes people throw in audio or something like that. Most of the major magazines, though, don't do things like that. One thing it's good to always know about is the exclusivity period on a story, because I find I have made more money sometimes off of reprints than the actual original story itself. I have the story, The Pull of the Herd. I originally got a very token payment for it, but I loved the market. I love Anathema, so that was fine. But then I was able to resell that story several times and I made much more off of it. But I had to be aware of when the rights were going to revert back to me. So, for example, I had sold it to Anathema, and then Podcastle ended up opening in October or something of that year. And I figured out when the exclusivity rights were going to end on the contract. And when I submitted it to Podcastle, even though I didn't have the rights back at that time, I said, I don't have the rights on this yet. The rights will revert on this day. So they still considered the story, even though I didn't have the rights. They had it in mind that the rights would become available in the future. So I didn't miss out on that submission opportunity because of that. So that is one thing I would pay attention to. I tend to not like venues that want to go over a year exclusivity because I can sell it again, or I can put it in a collection, or I can do something else with it. So that's one thing I'd pay attention to.
I've seen some people talk about magazine guidelines where there will be fine print that says if you submit to it, you are basically giving them rights to your story, which was very strange to hear about, or that they don't have to tell you before they accept it and publish it, which I found also very strange. Yeah, all the looks. But yeah, outside of those, I haven't had much issue. I just would pay attention to the fine print that submissions have on their website, just in case for this kind of language that is not really standard for most markets.
That's a good point. I've heard about that. I've actually haven't come across it, but I have heard about weird things where it's basically by submitting, you've given up all your rights to the story. It's like, what? All right, so the next thing of this is there's going to be some edits probably. Usually it's just a bit of a small cleanup on the story, I think is the typical case. Does anybody have anything they want to talk about with getting the edits from from the people publishing your story?
This is fun because sent me edits, I think this morning. So I've looked at them. I'm not going to talk about those edits though. Um, I think often writers are afraid of saying no, or like let's say you have your story and the editor. I've stories where writers are like, "Oh, they're asking me to change this thing, and this is really important to me, or this is fundamental to my story," right? And so they're afraid because there's a power differential going on of if I push back or if I upset them, are they going to still publish my story? And I'm not really picky generally with whatever I've gotten, but I did have one editor who who basically didn't just make edits, they rewrote parts of my story. And they were like, how about this? And then they wrote it into my story. And I had to be like, okay, I can do your suggestion, but we're going to do it in my voice and my words. And I think for a lot of new writers, that's kind of scary to say that because you're afraid. But I really do believe that any sort of editor who's bought your story must like your story. So, you should be able or feel comfortable to be like, I disagree with this edit, or I want to keep this the way it is, or I don't like this language change, and just write because in the end it is your story. So yeah, that would just be my one point, is to sort of, if you don't want to change something and you really feel passionate about that, then you should say that.
Yeah. Adding to that, so if they've accepted your story already, I'm frozen. So can you hear me still?
We can hear you, but yeah, your
Okay.
video seems to be frozen.
Okay. I'll just keep going. If they've accepted your story, you can basically say no to some of those edits. It's not like a revise and resubmit where they say, if you do this, we will accept you. Or if you do it well enough, we'll accept you. But I've had edits ranging from like they've moved one comma to they've changed my English. So I write in Canadian English. So including U's and Z's rather than S's. And usually people don't even change it, but some do. So sometimes they add a comma, they change my English. And then I've had some where they're like, can you add these 3 scenes to expand this middle section? That was a new one I had, and it was totally valid. But I was like, oh my goodness. I was not in a mental space to continue writing this story because it was already accepted and I considered it done. So sometimes you just have to adjust mental space.
So I feel like I'm a little different, where I'm very much a yes man, where I will get edits like yes, 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 yes. And then if they do tell me to add things and it makes sense, I'll be like, yes, I will add all of that in. Because I feel like myself as a writer, sometimes I'm not completely confident in my story either, in like how complete it is, because I know I am the type to underwrite rather than overwrite. And usually there is always some kind of room for expansion in my stories, I would say personally. So I've gotten like rewrite requests. Of course, those are a little different from acceptances, or like conditional acceptances on whether I expand the stories or not. So there have been stories where I submit it as 800 words. And after the process, it comes out as 1,700 words. Give Me English and F and SF actually went in 2,100 words or so. After the revise and resubmit, it was 4,400. Yeah, so there are like situations like that. So I feel like I'm the type who is very open to revision. There are always more stories, so I'm not like too precious about each individual story. But if there's something like very stylistic that people want to change and I don't want to change because I want it to sound a certain way, then I will push back against it. So one example, well, this isn't a short story, but it was for my novella actually. And I have a second person perspective in it. And at first, my editor had suggested I take it out and change it into either first or third person. But I was like, no, no, no. I have to keep this. This is how it has to read. I refuse to change it. So for situations like, yeah, Suzan has read it, so she'll know which parts I'm talking about. But yeah, so for situations like that, I will be like very adamant about not changing. Yeah.
I do think though that, I mean, if generally you're working with nice editors and stuff, like it's not an adversarial, it shouldn't be an adversarial relationship. Like it shouldn't be like, oh well, you shouldn't, I don't think I feel insulted by the things sometimes. I mean, sometimes if they, I have rarely been approached in an insulting way about edits. So wouldn't necessarily take it personally, like, oh, I'm a failure and and because they've accepted your story. So it's just working on it to make it, you know, these are just suggestions sort of thing.
Okay, so my last question about having something accepted is around marketing. I always sort of found it surprising, especially when I first started doing this, how often like I'd get into a anthology and it would come out, and there's like 16 authors involved, and 14 of them don't say anything about their short story being launched online, and I always found that weird myself. But I wanted to ask. You all do you think it's important to get the word out about your story when it's published and promote the publication? And what do you do to promote it and market it?
I guess
Anyone?
I'll go first this time. Um, so I'm very much, I would say, a Twitter marketing fiend. I have given this name to myself. Um, I feel very self-conscious about self-promotion as much as I do it a lot. And like I try my best to promote the magazines and like the stories I have published, but every time I do, I always feel like I'm like spamming someone's timeline with my promotions. And I really want to like promote the story or the magazine more than once, right? Because when you promote it once, not everyone might see it on your timeline or like during different times of the day, whatever it is. But then psychologically, my brain is like, you already promoted it once. Stop shouting at people about it. This is good enough. just go back in your hole and do your thing and stop bothering other people. So then like usually I would just promote a story once. And if someone like says something nice about it, I'll like repost it. But then I don't want to like feel like I'm shouting in people's ears about everything.
Honestly, I have taken cues from I'm like, oh, look how she's promoting this story. Like she often does like a screenshot of the first page or like the first few lines and things like that to really give the tone of a new thing. But yeah, I do Twitter. I have a website. I put them on the HWA newsletter that I'm not sure anyone reads heavily because it's so big. You read it, sorry. I shouldn't assume. Probably everyone reads it, all 300 pages of the HWA newsletter monthly. I read the Canadian one, for sure. The Canadian Crypt, yeah. I don't have in my own newsletter yet. I know you do. And I'm on your mailing list.
I also have a hard time with promotion. And it's a cultural thing. Like the culture I was brought up in, we are not supposed to talk about ourselves, or we are not supposed to sort of say how fabulous we are. And so every time I post, there's this struggle inside me going on with you are talking about yourself, but you shouldn't be talking about yourself. But if you don't talk about like, if no one knows where your story is, then how are they going to read it? And it's a discoverability issue, right? And I mean, we are in strange times right now, and I've mostly used Twitter for this. But things are interesting there right now. So I've been trying to like get the Instagram going a bit more because of it. But I absolutely do post when I get when the story comes out. And I post it once when it comes out, and like if someone reviews it or they say something nice about it, I will retweet that. Or if it ends up as a reprint or something, I will retweet that. I don't know if this is correct information, but I heard this term once that an audience has to hear something 7 times for it to stick. I don't know if that's a fact, but just doing it once on that feed, everything scrolls by so quickly. You don't really know if you've actually captured anyone's attention. So I try to mitigate my guilt feelings of promoting by saying, well, maybe they didn't notice the first time, so I'll just retweet this. But yes, I am very much into promoting the work and the mags. But no, I don't just do promotion on those things. I do other crazy things too. I try to mix it up so it's not just promotion feed Suzan all the time, because that's annoying.
I just want to quickly add one thing to what Suzan was saying about culture and like promoting ourselves. And then I feel like within our family, it's very much like you do not talk about your accomplishments unless someone asks you about them first. Or your parents do the bragging. They do the whole phone call relatives. My daughter has a book coming out, buy it. You don't call your own relatives and be like, buy my book, I have a book coming out, you know? So I very much feel that on Twitter too, where if someone's shouting about my book, I'll like hop on the bandwagon about it. But then shouting about my own book is kind of like, please, I'm sorry. I know it's been going on for a long time, but I'm just trying to live.
Yeah, I can definitely identify with that. There is that thing like, well, people aren't asking about it. Why should I be saying anything about it? But so we are at time, but I actually got a message from Jessica that she can run a bit longer if we needed to. If everybody else is okay with that, I'd actually like to just get to a few of the questions and comments in our Twitter chat, because we've had a really great audience with this. So I'd like to give them a bit of a chance to ask their questions. So maybe we can just run like another 5 to 7, 8 minutes and then sign off. That's okay with everyone? Okay. All right. So what do we have here? So we have Eld Knight Errant asks, do you think your short story writing has influenced your novel writing style or the other way around? If so, how? Anyone have an answer for that? No.
Okay, here's a quick answer.
I think Suzan.
So I started novels, then short stories, right? That's my trajectory. Novels, I remember I saying, I cannot stop writing a novel to edit anything, or else I will never finish the book. That is a thing that I've always had with novels. With short stories, because you can go back and edit a little bit, I find that I'm actually able to put something out. Like my last novel that I wrote is actually, I was able to edit it a little as I wrote it, rather than you cannot look or go back or do anything until you get to the end. So yes, I feel like I'm a little edity now in novels, and I couldn't before. How's that?
Okay.
So I usually write my short stories in one go. I will sit there and I will not leave my desk until I finish it a few hours later. So going into novels and novellas, yikes. Can't do that, obviously, unless you just don't sleep and, But so when I wrote Linghun novella, it was about 20,000 words when I first finished it, and obviously it got expanded afterwards. But I very much wrote that whole thing in 1 week, from like 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. for 7 days without stop, because I just did not know how to stop, given the way I wrote short stories. And I was like, if I don't get it now, like all down, I'm gonna lose momentum and I'm never going to finish this. But now I'm working on my first novel, and it's supposed to be like around 80K words. And I have so much other things going on. Obviously, cannot just put my life aside for like a month and do that anymore. Unless I like somehow average maybe like 6 to 8,000 words a day and get it done in 10 days without sleep. Which I'm like very much tempted to try at this moment, but there's just like no 10 consecutive days that I can do this. When I wrote Lincoln, I was in school, and it was like during a break time, so I could do that, and I didn't take on a lot of extra things because I was like, yes, I'm in school, therefore I should not take on extra things. So for that 10 days I just wrote it. I mean 7 days, whatever time. But yeah, anyways.
So I don't even know what's happening with me in this novel I'm trying to write. I don't know. I am a short story writer, and so I think what short stories have given me is a good sense of like you guys were mentioning earlier, line level attention to detail. I'm very good at like specific things that you need in short stories. Well, I'm saying I'm very good. I feel horrible saying that. Maybe I'm good at these things, like building up very emotional impact quickly, or doing that sort of thing. And I'm trying to. It's hard because when I wrote the first chapter of my novel and I sent it to my friend, and she said, "This is great, but it's a short story pace. It's not a novel pace. You give up too much information." So I had to go back and rewrite the whole thing because I was writing it like the story was going to be over in the first chapter, and it's not. I also I don't write very quickly. Like, okay, so Laughter Among the Trees last year, it took me 8 months to write that, and it's 6,000 words. So I put a lot of time and effort into it, and I don't really work on a schedule. I just show up whenever I'm ready and do it. I don't have a routine. I don't do things like this. So I really don't know if short story has helped. Writing short stories has prepared me to write a novel in terms of the actual work putting in. I'm only at 10,000 words on this book, and I think it's going to kill me. Yay.
No, this has been absolutely fantastic. I was looking, I'm sorry we won't get to all the questions. I do want to make sure that we have a chance to close out of here without somebody having to eject at the last minute. So again, this has really been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it myself. I want to thank you all. Maybe we can just go around one last time. If there's any final thoughts or anything you'd like to give a shout out to, I'd like to give you all the opportunity to do that. Why don't we go and, like, when we started, I went, guess counterclockwise. Let's go clockwise. So, Suzanne, would you like to start us?
Thanks for listening to me and thinking that I know something about anything. Yeah, so I do have my short story collection coming out it's at the end of September, beginning of October. It's called Skin Thief. It's going to have a new novelette in it that's about 10K. And it is very much horror, dark fantasy. A lot of the story, some of the stories have been online, but several of them have been in anthologies only. So they've never been all like not freely available, but available in one place like that. So that's good. I have a novella coming out next year, and it is not horror. It's a space opera. So, but I mean, there is a scary part in it because I can't write anything too happy, right? Because that's weird. So I have that. And just thoughts. I mean, I guess people are. I'm going to try and be fast. Don't give up. That's what I want to say. Like, keep trying, and it's really anybody who finishes a story, that's an accomplishment, and anybody who submits a story, that's an accomplishment. You should be really proud of yourself for that. Okay, I'll be quiet.
I will also try to be real quick. So I have a gothic ghost novella titled Ling Hun coming out next Tuesday. So in like 2 days. And then I have Small Tales Between Worlds, which is already out. A very, very small collection of short stories interspliced with like interviews. And it's like mostly my works that people don't know that well. And then I have I Am I coming in June. It's like about a cyborg who is trying to become more robotic, kind of like myself. Anyway, I will have an event where it's I versus AI, where I will go up against an AI writing program and see who writes better.
Exciting. Okay. What am I promoting? You know what I'm going to promo? So I don't have any of my own stuff that's like solely me. But one of the cool things I have coming out April 18th is Collage Macabre, an exhibition of art horror. I and I are both in it. And it was put together by a group of random writers. We're calling ourselves the Future Dead Collective for the sake of the book. There's no editor. We edited it ourselves. We did the entire thing ourselves. The cover art was even done by one of us, Christy Nogle, who folks may know as a writer, but she's also an artist. So she did our cover. And yeah, so that's April 18th. It's art, horror, a bunch of short stories. There's art. And on Saturday, April 22nd, links should be going out in the next day or two. We're doing a party online. It's free. There's going to be prizes and art games, and I'm hosting it. So it's going to be really exciting and fun. Enforced excitement and fun, because I'm going to be making everyone have fun, hopefully. Yeah, if anyone wants to continue chatting with me, I'm Jessica Peter 1 on Twitter, or jessicapeter.ca is my website. And final thoughts on submissions: find people. So don't give up, but also find people that will help keep you motivated. You can swap critiques with. All of those sort of things really help in terms of braving the rejections and making it through the slush pile.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. As I said before, I really appreciated this. I want to thank everybody watching on Twitch. I'm sorry we didn't get to all your questions. There were some great ones out there, but we're just running short on time. And finally, I'm David 13, the event coordinator for the Horror Writer Association Ontario chapter. And I hope you will join us again when we do another one of these events. So that's it. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks all. Keep pushing forth. You got this.